de Muertos. Bienvenidos Dia de Muertos. We just finished the parade in downtown Mexico City.
Dia de Muertos, and yes, the people here call it Dia de Muertos, not Dia de los Muertos, is held annually on November 1st and 2nd. It's a time when families gather to honor and remember their deceased loved ones. It's not really a somber occasion though, it's meant to be more of a festive one. It's also become quite fashionable outside of Mexico these days.
Do you mind?
Examples of this event being heavily commercialized are not hard to find. It's a tradition widely understood to have originated from Aztec culture. It's marketed that way by the Mexican government, and it's how many people understand its origin.
However, that's not entirely true. And I know what you're thinking, the audacity of this white dude to question this hallmark of Mexican culture, and valid, but hear me out.
Dia de Muertos falls on the same days as the Catholic traditions of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. So, very similar, albeit generally less dramatic, observances can be found all around the world. Down through Central America and throughout South America, across most of Western Europe and much of West Central Africa, even popping up in Asia, Macau, East Timor, and the Philippines. There's a common thread here, and it's not the Aztecs.
For example, this parade, everything you just saw, only started in 2016.
In 2015, the James Bond film Spectre hit theaters, with an action-laden assassination opening sequence. The setting? A Dia de Muertos parade through the streets of Mexico City. A parade that didn't actually exist. Seeing this in the film, Mexican tourism officials began the parade the following year, to prevent the potential disappointment of expectant visitors.
We have witnessed this incredibly vulgar expression of the festivity. It looks like a carnival with all these huge images of skeletons making a parade in the street in Paseo de la Reforma. That's completely insane. That's completely out of shape. That's something I never saw in my life. I am a researcher at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, and I belong to an institute that is called Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas. What we do is history of culture and history of art, mostly of Mexico. Any Mexican would acknowledge that Dia de Muertos is very important for us and would accept that sometimes confusing imagery of the Muertos festivity as something Mexican. Now, the point is that it has been abused to extremes that are even ridiculous. The cliche of the skeleton and the Mexican flag and the charro hat, these kind of cliches might be effective in a campaign for touristic interests, for example, but are extremely insensitive from the point of view of the meaning of culture and the living, the actual living of cultural practices. And that happens whenever there is a feature clearly identified as national, there's the risk of putting it all together in one cliche and especially giving to the world the idea that this is it. And when you see behind that, it's hollow, there's nothing, unless you structure, you organize, you try to see the practice going on. As a Mexican, as someone that has been living in Mexico for 58 years, I can say that I have never had the impression that the people around, that the people in their houses, that the people in the countryside, the native people in the towns that I know are happy or in any way playing with that. They take it seriously. They are afraid of that as everybody is. and they are sad in front of the fact of death, and the intimate, familiar way of being with the deceased in the 1st and 2nd of November is a sad one. It's a grieving one, and then the youngsters go to the plaza and they use the masks and they make this festival.
So here's the timeline.
Before European contact, the Aztec... By the way, even the word Aztec is confusing and complicated and colonial. It wasn't even a common term until it was used by German academic Alexander von Humboldt in the 19th century.
Usually, it refers to the people who famously founded their capital city of Tenochtitlan on an island in Lake Texcoco, the site of modern-day Mexico City. These people called themselves the Mexica. However, Mexica also refers to the people of Tlatelolco, who split from the Tenochtitlan Mexica and founded their own city. The Mexica of Tenochtitlan then made a deal with 2 other city-states, Tlacopan and Texcoco, forming the Triple Alliance, which is also sometimes just referred to as the Aztec. The Triple Alliance then militarily conquered many surrounding indigenous groups and city-states, forcing them to become vassal states in their empire. These people collectively are also often referred to as, you guessed it, the Aztecs.
None of these people referred to themselves as Aztec on the day-to-day. So before European contact, the indigenous groups of the region had a variety of beliefs, but had a same general interpretation of death.
Death was not necessarily something to be feared, but something to be celebrated. Human sacrifice was a common practice of the Tenochtitlan Mexica, and violent deaths were an honor. Likewise, honoring the dead and praying to the god of death were an important part of daily life. When the Spanish arrived, they brought with them their own Catholic beliefs and practices, often making a point to stamp out local customs. Thus began this mixing of European and local beliefs.
Over the years, some version of Dia de Muertos began to take form in a process called syncretism.
It's a question of culture. The kind of culture that original peoples of Mexico had happened to be mixed with the culture that Spaniards brought. And the strength of political institutions in the colonial times amounted for a lot of presence of Spanish influence. So Mexican culture is the result of a very deep combination of possibilities of behavior, institution, aesthetics, conceptions from different worlds, especially pre-Columbian and Spanish. The way national identity has been built in Mexico has, for many decades, been based on the idea that the more authentic, the more original, and the strongest part of our identity is being native or being Indian. It is not a very historical thought. It does not resist a deep historical analysis of cultural history. Probably since time of liberal politics in the 19th century, it was created a description where native is a victim of a foreigner aggressor, offender. Independence is the moment where the offender is defeated and the true original victim succeeds to go on and live under modern institutions, but in their identity, they basically preserve what was. This is a cartoon of true history, but has the trademark of our liberal politics, where a strong anti-Hispanic thought was developed, and a very strong indigenismo grew up. And this is very important to understand the presence of the skull and the presence of the skeletons. Some people like to link our skeletons and skulls with pre-Columbian times, because in pre-Columbian times, they were the Zompantlis with all the skulls, and there were sacrifices and exhibitions of body parts and bones. The thing is that all that was banned very early. After a few years, that was not acceptable. Those things were never done again. In the decade of 1520s, that was prohibited. That was not done anymore. People, a few decades after, people could not have the memory of skulls in the square or bones hanging around, because they were not.
By the 20th century, modern Mexico had embraced this idea that they were the inheritors of a pre-Hispanic legacy as a means to unify the nation's identity and differentiate it from Spanish, French, and American cultural influence. However, the practice of Dia de Muertos was in decline. Mexico's lighter-skinned upper classes continued to show contempt for indigenous people and mocked the holiday as superstitious.
Mexico is a country where being Indio is not a nice thing to be if you want your rights to be respected, even if you want to be respected inside of a city or of a shop. People with guaraches dressing or looking like Indios are frequently having problems, or even they're expelled in the mall. The rights of people from native origin, native appearance, cultural features are frequently discriminated. So it is a very schizophrenic culture that claims with honor and with proud everything great of Mexico has to do with the Aztecs and the pyramids and all that. And in the everyday life, one of the worst insults that you can say to someone is Indio. So Indio is an insult, but India is the reason of our greatness. So we are great because we are Indio, but if you are in India, I insult you. We have this incoherence in the, for the one part, we admire and present pre-Columbian as the origin of our best cultural strength. And on the other hand, in the everyday life, native people that still speak their languages or live in the ancient ways are marginalized and are disrespected. That's what happens.
The result is people that aspired for a more middle-class lifestyle distanced themselves from the practice of Dia de Muertos.
That changed in the 1970s when the government intervened, recognizing the celebration's potential for tourism. Here in Michoacán, one of the most popular places to celebrate Dia de Muertos, it's turned from muted family occasion to something else.
Locals were monetarily incentivized to participate, and activities organized for the festival expanded enormously. Says one researcher, tourism has virtually created this Day of the Dead, or at least embellished the traditional observance beyond recognition. Dia de Muertos, as we know it today, was orchestrated by the government. In order to promote national identity, it has emphasized the pre-Hispanic roots of the holiday while downplaying the arguably much more prominent European ones. It has turned from quiet family gathering to a rowdy generator of tourist dollars and exporter of Mexican soft power.
All that to say, so what? Yes, this version of Dia de Muertos was constructed by the Mexican government, but that was 50 years ago. At some point, the constructed becomes the authentic, and I don't think there's any denying that Dia de Muertos is an authentic part of Mexican culture.
Looking around this cemetery, it's clear that this is an event that holds a lot of significance for people. There's tears, and there's laughter, and there's music, and there's silent vigils. Yes, the origins of the festival are largely misunderstood and misrepresented, but I'm in no position to be the arbiter of whether Dia de Muertos is so-called fake or real. Sitting here, it sure feels pretty real for the people that practice it.